Andrew Leigh is the Labor MP for Fraser here in the ACT. He's also the Shadow Assistant Treasurer. And Andrew Laming is Liberal MP for Bowman in Queensland. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Chris.
Andrew Leigh, to you first. There are indications that government spending is going to rise in this year rather than fall, and it'll be maybe 5 years before spending is back on trend. Given that, does the budget really require further spending cuts this year?
Well, I think the real problem with the government is that having come to office saying that debt to GDP of 14% required a debt truck, now when you have the prospect of 50 to 60% debt to GDP, they think that's all right.
So should there be spending cuts, further spending cuts unveiled in this year's budget for the good of the long term of the government's fiscal position?
You've always got to make responsible saves. When we were in office, we made more than $100 billion of saves. We put in place after the GST a 2% real spending cap and stuck to it, doing things like means testing the private health insurance rebate, which is the Coalition wants to undo. What we didn't do, though, was to break promises and hurt the most vulnerable.
So your opposition isn't, looking at the last budget, wasn't against the strategy so much as the individual measures, GP co-payment or something you're opposed to, but if the government was pushing for further budget consolidation in this budget, that would be a good thing?
Chris, I don't think there was a strategy last time around, and that's why the Prime Minister has flip-flopped so massively from saying a debt truck is bad but a debt aircraft carrier is good. He's, I think, potentially imperiling our AAA credit rating if he's to go out there and really say that a 50 to 60% debt to GDP is fine. We need a Prime Minister with a careful strategy which puts in place budget repair, but in a fair and measured way. Take Labor's policy on multinational tax avoidance.
That's a yes, is it? The government should identify further spending cuts in this budget?
Well, the government needs to bring down fair measures. We've identified a range of ways in which they could add to the budget bottom line. Our policy on multinational tax avoidance is a classic. Grounded in OECD research, costed by the Parliamentary Budget Office, adds $2 billion to the budget bottom line in a fair way, and Labor will back it.
Okay, so that's a yes.
I'm not going to the question as to whether there should be cuts to the most vulnerable. Of course there shouldn't. Of course the government shouldn't cut the pension, shouldn't put in place a GP tax. But they should look at fair savings measures. They should look at the fact that superannuation tax expenditures exceed the value of the pension, and that rather than breaking their promise and putting pensions on a slower growth trajectory, they might instead look to fair taxation of people with millions of dollars in their superannuation accounts.
Okay, Andrew Laming, can I sort of flip the question over the other way for you? Given that this indication is that spending is going to blow out, it'll take 5 years just to return it to trend. Is this the right time for the government to be entertaining new spending measures such as family measures, childcare measures or tax cuts for small business?
Well, perhaps I can flip that question back on you, Chris. Is it right that just because Labor left us in this diabolical budget situation, should we forego all new, innovative and essential spending measures?
Well, I think business people would say, yes, you're the government, whatever the situation the budget is in, you have to deal with it. Now, you can blame Labor, you can blame iron ore prices, but you're the government.
And should we just forego 3 to 6 years of innovative new policy because we have this debt? Of course not, and that's exactly why Scott Morrison is on the case with the families package.
That was Gough Whitlam's argument.
And let's step back a bit. I mean, what you have here is Labor now evicted after the House party, and where the emergency services turning up to fix the joint. And I know that there's a few saves here that are being proposed by Labor, but there's just as many that they proposed in government that they refuse to support now from opposition. So it's a mixed message from the opposition. This is a massive task, and if there's one thing that comes out of the last 18 months, it is that as a government, you have to titrate the public's willingness to repair the budget. And of course, we were ambitious last year with a whole host of measures, not all of them being passed. But what you're seeing now is not backflipping or any sort of uncertainty or equivocation. What you're seeing is a government fundamentally trying to understand how far Australians want to go in repairing quickly and how much of it may take up to a decade to do.
So you're the emergency services have come to fix the problem. But on the other hand, you're saying you should be able to, regardless of what Labor's left you or whatever's happening in the global economy, you should be able to push ahead with new spending measures. Isn't that rather contradictory?
Well, self-evidently, government does two things at the one time and never ceases to do one for the other. So there's always something happening in both sides of the budget ledger. But in reality, we are trying to understand just how far Australians are willing to go in a second year of government with this tightening. And Howard himself talked about going into debt is like going down the escalator. Walking out of it is up the fire escape. You cannot drag people with you. You need to walk side by side. How much people will brook and tolerate is a very complex political question.
You seem to be suggesting they're going down the escalator and climbing up the fire escape simultaneously.
Well, I've just refused to rule out a new program or two. I mean, obviously stopping new spending is one way to fix this problem, but we know the size of the problem precludes that being the only solution. So we're going to need to do more than just that.
We'll have many weeks yet to talk about the budget. Sorry, Andrew Leigh, you want to have one response, don't you?
Well, Chris, Bart Simpson would be embarrassed to blame shift the way these guys blame shift. The fact is that since they've come to office, we've had an $80 billion increase in Australia's debt. And Labor is willing to work with the government to try and find responsible saves, but we're not willing to hurt the most vulnerable in the process.
Well, they need to cross the road and give us a hand rather than watching from the gutter on the other side.
Cross the road while going down the escalator. Okay.
More than $20 billion of saves supported.
Okay, let's plenty of time to talk about the budget over the coming months.
Yep.
Same-sex marriage. Andrew Laming, should there be a free vote in the Liberal Party?
I'm very happy to have a free vote, happy to have a conscience vote. I suppose I have a very mid-position in this debate, which makes me particularly sort of unliked in this highly extreme debate of yes or no. But I believe in civil union. I think it should be widely, freely available for all couples. I don't think it should be any form of discrimination, and there still remain some elements of it, particularly in the immigration system for gay couples. But apart from that, really, to me, marriage is a separate and unrelated issue to that of civil union.
And would you like to see the party make a decision on a free vote this week?
No, I'm not calling the time on that. I'd just like to see, and I would be happy to partake in a free vote when it becomes available.
And just give us an insight in the sort of pressure you're under as a local MP, how much mail, etc., coming to your office on this issue?
Almost nothing. It goes straight through a spam filter and into a large folder. We press one button, identify the postcode where it comes from my electorate. There'll be a handful of emails, and we'll be doing them over a 10-minute period today.
So people email and mail and send messages to your electorate,
yes,
and you just hit a button and send them off to junk?
I can identify all those that come from my electorate, and that's where the rest of them go, precisely.
So you don't care about anyone from outside your electorate?
I love them dearly, but they need to come and move to my electorate if they want to engage me one-to-one in correspondence as a federal MP.
Well, that's an insight into the work practice, I guess, the management of information in an
survival
MP's office.
Too. If there'll be 4,600 emails in 48 hours, they will have exactly the same content, so they can't expect a tailored response.
Okay. Andrew Leigh, is this something that's occupying your office?
Certainly we get constant traffic about the issue, and for me it's an issue of equality. I'm an egalitarian and believe that we ought to have marriage equality. But I also think that it can be a conservative issue as well. David Cameron famously said that he supported marriage equality not despite being a conservative, but because he was a conservative. Marriage is ultimately a stabilising institution. We need to recognise that many same-sex couples have children or aspire to have children, and in the same way that marriage can be a stabilising institution for some heterosexual couples, it ought to be open to all.
Are you encouraged by Andrew Laming's position? As he says, he's sort of in a middle ground position here on the status of same-sex marriage, yet he's supportive of a conscience vote.
Well, I think support for civil unions is long-standing across the parliament.
I'm referring more to his support for a conscience vote here.
And I'm pleased that Andrew's supporting a conscience vote. Labor's current position is Tanya Plibersek has a bill to support marriage equality, but that won't be brought to the floor of Parliament until it's got a co-sponsor from the Liberal and National parties. Our feeling is that once there is clear commitment to a conscience vote, there'll be a Liberal and National Party co-sponsor. It might be a Malcolm Turnbull, a Kelly O'Dwyer, some of the range of House Liberals who've privately said they support marriage equality, and then we can bring it to the floor of Parliament and hopefully bring about a reform, this reform now. It's going to happen, let's face it. The question is when, not if.
A final issue, Andrew Laming, does Scott Morrison owe there's people from the Save the Children who were removed from Nauru last year, does he owe them an apology?
Well, that's a matter for Scott, because I only know what I've publicly read, and I don't believe he does. What we have here are first-order effects, which is the Moss inquiry, and the fact that we need to work wherever we can to stamp out any form of abuse that has been described, even though hard to verify. But the second-order issues about whether someone deserves to apologise to another are not of great interest to me.
Why not?
Because I think the main focus here is on adopting these 19 recommendations. The main focus is on ensuring that we're making the appropriate decisions around people that come to this country, process them according to global treaties, get them resettled as fast as we can, and of course find other locations for those who don't qualify as refugees, and that is the main issue.
You don't feel there's any sense of injustice being done to the 10 people involved?
Not overly, no. I think they were there to do a job. They were asked to leave. Whether or not you can actually substantiate or verify what was claimed, there was a sense that there was some coordination and coaching going on.
Well, former Commissioner Moss says there is no evidence to support.
That's great. Then I think they can go. That group can go back to the Minister and ask if they can return and keep doing their job, and that's a matter for them.
And an apology?
No, of course not.
Andrew Leigh, what do you think?
Labor set up the refugee resettlement agreement, but we were able to put in place. We ought to be able to put in place a refugee resettlement agreement while humanely treating detainees.
I'm asking into the specific case that Scott Morrison removed these people from Nauru amid allegations that they were encouraging self-harm, facilitating protest, facilitating people making claims of self-harm. The former commissioner has found that there's no substantive evidence that they were doing that, yet they were removed. Does the former minister, owe them an apology?
Well, I think he does. And the point I was making, Chris, was that you can support the refugee resettlement agreement, as I do, while still believing that asylum seekers have the right to be treated with dignity and to be free of the sort of abuse that appears to have occurred in these environments. It makes disturbing reading, and I'm worried too when I see the Prime Minister simply saying things happen. His first response to this, with his first response to so many other things, seems to be out of step with the values of Australia.
Okay, Andrew Leigh, Andrew Laming, thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Andrew.
Cheers.